In March, I made a video titled Octopath Traveler is shaping up to be a fantastic RPG, where I argued exactly what the title suggests, that Octopath Traveler is going to be great. So, was I right? In terms of reviews, sales, and fan reception, the game did incredibly well, and I'm happy about it. It's always a good thing when a JRPG does well because it means more JRPGs in the future. So broadly speaking, I suppose that I was correct about the game. But what about some of the specific claims that I made? I said that the gameplay is going to be very fun and strategic, and that while the story was hard to gauge with just pre-release information, it was showing positive signs. And with these more specific claims, my predictions were mixed at best. So let's get into some of the claims that I made and evaluate how I did. In my original video, I talked about how cool it is to be able to switch between weapons in the middle of combat. I said that it will be really fun experimenting with different party members to find a team that covers the most weaknesses, and I was basically on the money here. For random encounters, I would put out several different types of attacks until I finally got a weakness and then proceed to buff the characters that could hit the weakness to take the enemy out. This was pretty fun for me, and it definitely broke up the monotony of random encounters that you see in other JRPGs. The only exception to my claim was with regard to how boss battles worked. Instead of just having a team that covers a wide range of weaknesses, I would figure out the boss's weakness in an experimental battle and then build a team specifically to counter it. My team would generally consist of 2 to 3 characters that can specifically hit a weakness of the boss, and then 1 or 2 characters to heal and buff the attackers. Thankfully, the battle system was really deep and there were many viable strategies for every single boss. Also, the game required you to use every character, and as a result, you basically had every class combination at a decent level at your disposal. It was great to come up with a new strategy tailored to a specific boss and coming out on top, and then thinking of a new strategy for a different boss. And this is in contrast to Bravely Default, where there were very few late game strategies that you would have to apply over and over again. So overall, building a team that covers the most weaknesses is very useful for most encounters, with the exception of boss battles. So I'll rate this claim as mostly correct. My next prediction was that the boost mechanic will significantly enhance the gameplay. I also said that while the mechanic is more powerful than Brave and Default, since you don't have to guard to gain a point, it'll be fine as long as the enemies are more powerful. And I was definitely correct here. The game's difficulty was just right. It wasn't overly difficult, but you definitely needed a coherent strategy. The other interesting aspect about the boost mechanic was that enemies with depleted shield counters took more damage. So you're left with the choice of unleashing your boost to stun the enemy as quickly as possible, or saving your boost and dealing maximum damage when they are stunned. And the correct choice is situation dependent. So you really need a read of what's going on to figure out the best strategy for winning the battle. But the boost mechanic was also great for random encounters, where you can use the merchant's donate BP to give to a scholar and then unload on the enemy. There's really no doubt that this mechanic improved the gameplay, and I'll rate my claim as correct. I also said that turn order manipulation is going to play a fairly significant role. Now I said this because of Ulbricht's ability called Spearhead, which lets you act earlier the next turn. But personally, I barely manipulated turn order throughout the game, mainly because it wasn't super relevant. I mostly opted to just take an extra hit and then use a stronger attack. And when I did take turn order into consideration, it was in situations where my party couldn't take any more hits and I wanted to stun the enemy and heal up. I think part of the reason why I thought it would play a bigger role was because one of the 2 demo classes were able to manipulate turn order, so I figured that some of the other jobs would also be able to do that. But this just wasn't the case, so I'll rate this claim as false. In my original video, I expressed how I thought path actions would be fun and exciting. In particular, I talked about how they might add a genuine role-playing experience in a traditional sense, akin to Western RPGs or Dungeons & Dragons, and in that way, I was dead wrong. Path actions didn't really have a role-playing component to them, and there weren't really any major choices associated with them. Now, most JRPGs have linear stories and don't have major choices that significantly change the plot, and I actually like the genre because of it. So I don't think the lack of role-playing with path actions is inherently a bad thing. I was more so just wrong about how they would work. Now, as for whether path actions would be useful and exciting, I didn't particularly enjoy them all that much. I occasionally allured NPCs or fought duels and it was sort of fun, but I didn't care much for the other path actions. I was simply not engaged with the world of Octopath Traveler, so I didn't care for the tidbits of info that Scrutinize and Inquire gave me. However, Steel and Merchant were useful for getting some of the best weapons in the game, so I'll rate this claim as mostly false. Path actions didn't enhance the role-playing experiences, and I didn't personally find them all that fun, but they certainly had their uses. The last claim that I want to address is surrounding the story and characters. I thought that there were a lot of positive signs in the demo, but oh boy, I was catastrophically wrong here. The story in Octopath Traveler is pure garbage, and the characters are horrendous. I dreaded the story segments during the game, and unfortunately there were a lot of them. It's unbelievable how Square can successfully write a plot with so many words and so little substance, but that is what Octopath Traveler is. For one, you would think that the plots of the 8 travelers would connect together in some meaningful way. I didn't even mention this in my previous video because I thought it was so obvious, but nope, not for Square Enix. Octopath Traveler's plot is basically 8 crappy short stories with nothing to do with each other. The only character interaction you get is through brief skits called Travel Banter, which involves the characters spewing a few basic platitudes to each other over and over again. Cyrus talks about studying over and over again, Primrose talks about men, Ulbrich talks about honor or something. You get the point. Nowhere is the laziness of Octopath Traveler's story more evident than with Ophelia's plot. She is a cleric in service of a religious organization, and her plot revolves around completing a pilgrimage known as the Kindling in place of her sister. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad premise. After all, Final Fantasy X is a classic that's all about a pilgrimage. The difference is that Final Fantasy X provides a mysterious world in which Tidus is lost, and a fascinating antagonist in Sin. You see the terror that Sin causes right from the beginning, and the pilgrimage gradually builds up the suspense. Ophelia's plot does none of these things. It has no direction and sort of pulls enemies out of its ass. Every time she enters a new town to light a flame, she's somehow dragged into some internal town conflict and fights a random monster. It's quite the coincidence that every single time she goes to a new area, there's some random bad thing happening at that exact moment. It's awkward, it's lazy, and it's not at all interesting. The story that I was most hopeful for was Primrose's, and I suppose this was the best story of the bunch, and by best I mean least bad. But seriously, Primrose's plot had actual writing, actual background story, and actual plot twists. There isn't necessarily much character development, but there is a good reason for that. And there's also some interesting themes here about revenge, betrayal, and trauma. I still wish that they had explored sexual assault a little bit more, since it does seem like Primrose experienced quite a bit of it when she worked for Helganish. But regardless, I think there was enough with her plot for me to give it a pass. But with the rest of the character arcs, not so much. So when evaluating the claim I made, I can't rate it as anything but dead wrong. Overall, my claims were all over the place. I think I was pretty much on point when it came to gameplay, but for story, I was dead wrong. Now, when I look at the title, Octopath Traveler is shaping up to be a fantastic RPG. I think I was basically correct when it came to reviews, sales, and fan receptions. Plenty of people love the game, and I say power to them. But I also made that video for myself. I thought that I would love the game and that it would enter my upper echelon of favorite RPGs, perhaps in my top 25. But that just wasn't the case. I just don't think the game is fantastic, and I'm certainly not putting it on a personal top RPG list. Octopath Traveler might as well be called Mixed Bag the Game for me, because I find the story to be absolute trash and the gameplay to be really good. Part of me was totally satisfied with this game, and another part of me was a little disappointed. I struggle with what to think about this game, and I go back and forth quite a bit. I think a more accurate title would have been Octopath Traveler is shaping up to be an okay RPG, and that is a little bit disappointing. Anyways guys, that's it for this video. Let me know what you guys think about Octopath Traveler, and thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a great day.